Hi listeners. Welcome to my academic theology. What will follow is the text of an upcoming video which will take long to create as it will have about 60 illustrations. This reading is to be able to share the discovery of who the sons of God of Genesis 6 were, sooner. It is in relation to a breakthrough that elucidates the most persistent biblical mystery. Let's review the options offered for the identification of those beings called sons of God in Genesis 6. As little progress has been made during the last 2,000 years to solve the mystery of their identity. It is as if knowledge of who they were has been erased from the records and memory, and in more ways than one, they are ancient history. Following this history of interpretation, which is essential knowledge, especially for readers of the Book of Enoch, with the help of Hermetic and Vedic parallels, we will recover lost knowledge in a way you never thought possible. What is intriguing in Genesis 6 is the tale of the intermarriages between those sons of God and daughters of men. In the Hebrew version, the term used for them indicates proper marriages with rituals, and not a cohabitation. This often is something that believers in the fallen angel theory ignore. There also is a clue for who the daughters of men were. It was disclosed by Plato, but we will return to this later. The belief that the sons of God were dark angels is on the increase as the Book of Enoch, with its obvious parallels to Genesis 6, has apparently become an object of fascination to millions of people in recent years. The Roman Church caused one Enoch to go out of circulation in previous centuries because theologians realized the impossibility for celestial angels to actually cohabit with humans, but it is back in circulation because, in 1773 the Scottish explorer, James Bruce, brought back to Europe and Britain 3 copies that had been preserved by the Ethiopic Church of Abyssinia. For decades the Book of Enoch was mainly studied in academic circles until 1977, when Richard Lawrence's translation was reproduced in Forbidden Mysteries of Enoch, a work by Elizabeth C. Prophet. In another work with the title Fallen Angels Among Us, this author imparts the idea that the spirits of the Nephilim, that perished in the flood of Genesis, are among us in the sense of their reincarnation, and that the darkness that exists in the world today is their work. In this book she theorizes that in the antediluvian world these Nephilim had intellectual superiority as a result of previous incarnations and longer experience in the material dimension than other souls. She only regarded the progeny of the sons of God as incarnations of these alien evil spirits, but continued using the term fallen angels. Some exegetes speak of the uncertainty whether the sons of God were human or demonic beings. They normally know that, in the corresponding Hebrew, the term Bene Ha-Elohim, which is used for sons of God in Genesis 6, is present elsewhere in Scripture in the sense of divine and angelic. It may be for that reason that some exegetes assume the sons of God were angels. But for some reason it has not crossed their mind that it just means the sons of God were human beings with a divine and angelic nature. Furthermore, those beings did not create corruption in the old world, it is their offspring who did. In the King James Version the term giants, which you see on the screen, corresponds to the Hebrew term Nephilim, spelled with an F. In some other versions it has not been translated and is just spelled differently as Nephilim with PH, but then it looks as if it is a name for a particular people, which has recently been found to be erroneous because some scholars have discovered that this term, in the Hebrew text, is a substantive for the verb nephil, which means to fall. The meaning of Nephilim therefore is the fallen ones. The mention of giants instead of Nephilim or fallen ones, in the King James Bible, has led to theories to explain gigantism. The adherents of the fallen angel theory usually imagine that only the progeny of the intermarriages were giants, a gigantism that resulted from the genetic combination between angels and human women of the size we're today. The alternative is, as in theosophy, that all human beings, as well as the flora and fauna, were of greater size during the antediluvian era. They would have decreased in stature in the reset after the flood in the same way that the patriarchs' lifetimes got shorter and shorter. Despite the ambiguity of the text, we can see that Genesis 6 is in relation to a fall of man as the one extrapolated from the exegesis of Genesis 3:1, and not a fall of angels. In the Garden of Eden there is a tree of life, as well as a forbidden tree of knowledge of good and evil. Both these trees should be interpreted metaphorically. The tree of life can represent the inner teacher, as well as the pervasive cosmic divine principle, first cause or source, as it is present in almost all ancient multidimensional cosmological models. In the forbidden tree of knowledge is a serpent representing an evil force displaying skills to lead astray the symbolic man and woman in this old world of Genesis. Those descriptions are part of a system of writing that is pictographic. Interpretation relies on translation, so we will have to look into the history of biblical translation to be able to reveal who the sons of God were. The earliest translation of the Bible was into Greek. The work is called the Septuagint, and according to records, it was carried out in Alexandria for some Jews who spoke Greek. This happened in the reign of Ptolemy II Philadelphus, which was from 285 to 246 BC, when Egypt was part of the Greek Empire. According to Philo, a Jewish philosopher who lived in Alexandria from 25 BC to the year 50 of Christ's era, 70 Jewish translators, with knowledge of Greek, worked simultaneously and, miraculously, all of the translations were identical. In addition to the fact that the source of the Septuagint is lost, you may be surprised to hear that the corresponding canon of scripture used in Judaism, which is often erroneously referred to as the Hebrew original, only came into being 1,000 years after the Septuagint. The most ancient of the 24 authoritative books that form the canon of scriptures in Judaism is indeed dated to the 9th century AD. This canon is traced to a group of Jews, and we are asked to believe that it took them 1,000 years to assemble and complete the codification of their scriptures for correct pronunciation. The Hebrew text is called the Masoretic text. In Hebrew, the term Masoreth means tradition. These Masoretic Jews were descendants of the tribe of Judah. Historically, all translations carried out into Latin, German, and English, between the 4th century and 1611, were from this Greek Septuagint, not from Hebrew. The doctor of the Church, Jerome, translated the Vulgate in 382 CE, and it became standard for the Western Latin-speaking Church. It was a revision of a collection of Latin translations from the Greek Septuagint. We do hear references to the Hebrew original, but, as mentioned before, the actual text that was used for the Septuagint is lost. The term Vulgate means common and refers to the language spoken by the people as opposed to classical Latin. In William Tyndale's Bible of 1525 there was a translation from Hebrew, but it was from the Masoretic text dated to the 9th century AD. The 1611 authorized version called the King James Bible was not an original translation into English but a mixture of Tyndale's translation and of the Geneva Bible, which were from the same Masoretic text and the Septuagint. Some people think that the canonical texts used in Judaism are the Hebrew original, but the most ancient of them is dated to the 9th century, 1,000 years after Christ. As to the original that was the source for the Septuagint and that is lost, it is referred to as the Proto-Masoretic text, a precursor of the Masoretic text. But there are differences between the Septuagint and the Masoretic text. Some scholars have ascertained that in the post-70 AD period, this forerunner would have been under the control of rabbis who purged, manipulated and recopied it. They have concluded that certain errors noted in the Masoretic text were not accidental but have undergone deliberate revisions. They even say that if the originals disappeared, it was not by accident. The originals were discarded to hide discrepancies. They even expect the Septuagint to be more reliable as the agenda in Alexandria in Egypt was to preserve, whereas later, the Jews who did not accept Christ, modified their chronology to be able to claim that it was not yet time for the Messiah. About 860 years after Moses and 360 years after King Solomon, the tribe of Judah that had been taken into Babylonian captivity, was able to return to their homeland. Believing their captivity had been divine punishment, they did so with the mission to rebuild the dilapidated temple in Jerusalem, as well as keeping themselves separate. In 639 BC Josiah ascended to the throne of Judah. It was not that of Israel upon which King David and Solomon had reigned. Josiah set in motion a monotheist reform and wiped out other cults in his territory, murdering people. A claim was made that a book of the law was found in the temple during its restoration. Scholars agree that it was the story of the Exodus that had been lost to the tribe for 600 years, but Ezra is suspected to have edited this book of Moses. By the way, with regard to Moses, in the documentary The Exodus Decoded, it is proposed that the volcanic eruption of Santorini in 1500 BC caused a tsunami that permitted the miraculous parting of the Sea of Reeds, and the Red Sea was a mistranslation. After 6 years of research, Simha Yakubovich came to the groundbreaking conclusion that the Exodus took place 200 years earlier than previously thought. For all we know, the Septuagint could have been translated from the Samaritan scriptures called the Targum, spelled Targum. There are near 6,000 disparities between the Targum and the Masoretic text. This could explain the inconsistencies between the latter and the Septuagint. The people of Samaria, the Samaritans, descended from 3 of the tribes of Israel, Ephraim, Manasseh, and Levi. You have probably never heard of this, but the Samaritans have maintained that it was not they, but the Jews, who separated from the authentic stream of Israel after the death of King Solomon, and it's for that reason that when the tribe of Judah returned from captivity, the Samaritans opposed their project of rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. Are the Jews and their scriptures impostors of the true Israel that appears to have come to an end with King Solomon's death? To situate the Septuagint in time, it was translated about 700 years after King Solomon, who is known to have died in 922 BC. For details, see our channel Ascensions video on King Solomon. In that age the Israelites moved around because of trade and mining. Solomon had mines in other lands. The Phoenicians, known as the Sea People, navigated across the oceans. They were known in the Indus Valley and left inscriptions on the Newton stone discovered in Scotland. It was deciphered by L. A. Waddell, the controversial scholar for whom I have written a biography with the title The Rise of Man in the Gardens of Samaria, a biography of L. A. Waddell 1854–1938, published by Sussex Academic Press in 2009. One of his works had the title of The Phoenician Origin of the Britons. It's likely that who scholars call the Phoenicians reached the American continent. I suspect they were the Israelites and so-called lost tribes of Israel. Furthermore, they had more technology 3,000 years ago than has been acknowledged, as the Tibetans claim to have records of King Solomon's flying ships. And it was him who had a flying carpet. There are articles you can Google on the many myths behind flying carpets. Myths can be recollections of historical truths that have been sensationalized after knowledge has been lost. Stemming from some scrolls written by the 13th century Jewish scholar, Ben Sharira, as well as the Arabic tales of 1001 Nights, the flying carpet had magnetic properties that enabled it to fly, and it was an air vessel with room for 40,000 men. This probably was an exaggeration, as the number 40 was used in the sense of a long time. For example, it rained for 40 days and nights and Christ fasted for 40 days in the desert. This craft probably could accommodate 1,000 men. The carpet was invented around the time of King Solomon, they say. There were many, and they had many uses, such as to launch attacks, transport goods, and help readers to reach high shelves in the Library of Alexandria. In relation to Aladdin, the carpet system could teleport instantly and move by reading its master's thoughts. This was a necessary digression. To return to the subject of Genesis 6, a parallel to the Nephilim, in 1 Enoch, is one of the causes for the interpretation of the sons of God as fallen angels, because, as previously mentioned, some exegetes presume that the Hebrew term Nephilim refers to both the sons of God and their progeny. It could be due to an influence from the Book of Enoch. However, it is little known that the latter was rejected in Judaism from about the year 200. This was reported by Tertullian, an important theologian of the 3rd century. Origen also pointed out to Celsus that Enoch's book was not recognized by the churches, and the reason that it is apocryphal is that, in the 4th century, it was excluded from the Christian biblical canon. And that's not all. A theologian by the name of Sextus Julius Africanus, who lived from 200 to 245 AD, caused a reform from the belief in fallen angels with his assertion that the sons of God were purely human and descendants of Seth. He was the first theologian to oppose the fallen angel theory. Later, Jerome, the Hebraist and doctor of the Church, accused Enoch of being responsible for the heresies of the Manichaeans. Then, in the 3rd century, Lactantius, who lived from 260 to 330 AD, opposed the idea that the angels could have married women because they are incorporeal. In the 4th century, John Chrysostom rejected the suggestion that some angels united to human bodies because of their spiritual nature. In the late 4th century, another theologian, by the name of Philastrius, condemned the teachings of the Book of Enoch as a heresy. The Book of Enoch was classified as apocryphal in the 5th century when the churches East and West came to an agreement as to which texts to include in the biblical canon. I have arrived at the observation that the view of the sons of God as fallen angels was the earliest, and that it declined due to the influence of Julius Africanus' interpretation of Genesis 6, known as the Sethian doctrine, which is the view that the sons of God were the righteous sons of Seth, and the daughters of man were offspring of Cain. In agreement with this doctrine, Augustine of Hippo disputes in his work The City of God the impossibility for celestial angels to actually cohabit with humans, and Catholics still maintain that angels cannot procreate human children. Therefore the sons of God were human, they say. The Book of Enoch was banished because it was at opposite pole with this doctrine. Augustine and Jerome viewed it as generic, meaning written by many authors or containing extrapolations, and could not accept an earlier authorship than that of Moses, so they excluded it from the canon. Theologically, the fallen angel theory is a fall by lust, and Catholics oppose the idea that angels are subject to human lust, or need to have a physical relationship. They only accept the fall of Lucifer as a fall by pride. A reform from the fallen angel doctrine did take place, and its revival in our time, due to interest in the Book of Enoch, is a snare to make us reject the angels who defend us from the attacks of the dark powers. In the 19th century, scholars discovered that the term Bene Ha-Elohim, in the Masoretic text, always has the sense of divine and angelic elsewhere in the Bible, and is also used for majestic beings such as angels, kings, judges, and even to refer to the Messiah. So, they suggested that the sons of God could have been kings, but in all options they presented them as tyrants, polygamists, and wicked, a very negative way, and this, in my opinion, is because they failed to realize that the term Nephilim only refers to the unrighteous offspring, and not to their fathers. They also forgot that the phrase Bene Ha-Elohim indicates some beings with a good and even divine character. Perhaps this will help you to appreciate the degree to which the solution that will be offered here during the next few minutes is groundbreaking. Now, this is very important. I have discovered why the term angels is used in Greek in the Septuagint Bible to refer to the sons of God. It's not because the translators of the Septuagint believed in fallen angels that they use this term. It was because, in Alexandria, Greek, Egyptian and Jewish scholars, theologians and translators, were familiar with the work of wisdom ascribed to the primeval initiator that the Egyptians knew as Thoth, who, according to Herodotus, was known to the Greeks as Hermes Trismegistus. The term angels was understood in the sense of some initiators in human form with an angelic nature. The Alexandrian library had the largest archives that existed in antiquity. They most certainly had records that had been kept by the Egyptians and priests of Sais, spelled Sais, mentioned by Plato, for thousands of years, side by side with a mystical doctrine concerning the means to recover the perfect nature that Adam possessed and that mankind lost. This title Trismegistus had the meaning of 3 times great on the basis that Hermes had 3 successive incarnations in Egypt, and had remembered who he was. To this initiator was ascribed the invention of writing as well as the teaching of wisdom and all sciences. But it may have been the recovery of lost science and knowledge after the universal cataclysm. The Divine Pymander of Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus, a work ascribed to Thoth or Hermes, the original of which was in Arabic, is a transcript of a conversation by telepathic communication between Hermes and his higher mind, called Nu in Greek, spelled Nous. The Divine Pymander, or Pymander, is Hermes' own divine presence speaking to him. Hermes addressed Pymander as father, and in response, This higher mind called him Son. We are familiar with this terminology of Father and Son from the New Testament. The implication may be that Jesus the Christ was initiated in that Hermetic philosophy. As a human being, Hermes was not the source of his own teachings. He was in telepathic communication with his higher mind, the divine Pymander, and he channeled those teachings in the form of 17 books. In the second book, Pymander states that he is the mind that comes to men that are holy and good, and that his presence is a help to them by which they know all things. The divine Pymander is the same as the top figure in the chart created by the Summit Lighthouse that represents the I Am Presence. His emissary, or messenger, is the middle figure, which can be an archangel, the Christ self, or the higher self. The lower figure represents the soul and incarnation. This chart will be shown in the forthcoming video that will have a lot of illustrations. With regard to why the term angels is used in Greek in the Septuagint Bible to refer to the sons of God, my point is that with the loss of the Library of Alexandria and its center of research, which preserved and disseminated knowledge, as well as functioned like a beacon of enlightenment, the original connection of the sons of God with the ancient initiators was gradually forgotten. The library was burned by Julius Caesar about 200 years after the Septuagint was translated. Under the Roman Empire there was a decline from the refinement that had been attained. After a few centuries the meaning of some terms was lost and false ideologies were born from the darkness of ignorance. Also, etymologically, the term angel derives from the Mycenaean Greek term angelos, pronounced angelos, and it means a messenger, or one that makes announcements. That is the original sense of the term. With time it muted to angel in the sense of heavenly spirit. When the Septuagint was translated into English, it must have been assumed that this term meant angels, despite the fact that in Greek mythology the god Hermes is a messenger of the gods, and angelos actually means messenger in Greek. So it's a case of knowledge lost in translation, from Greek to English. The sense of words also change over the centuries. In fact, early English Bibles had a terminology that had to be revised because the meaning of some terms has changed since the 17th century. The connection of the term messenger with the initiator Hermes is one of the clues for the identification of the sons of God. As recorded in the Hermetica, the initiator known to the Greeks as Hermes Trismegistus, taught a revelation concerning the reintegration of man to a higher celestial sphere, by the Ogdoad. This was a doctrine of recovery of the perfect nature that Adam possessed. It's about the fact that immortality can be won by a spiritual alchemy of the soul through right thought and deeds, as well as spiritual practices. This tells us who Adam was. The translators of the Septuagint knew that Adam possessed an angelic nature. But later, this sense was confused with actual angels who dwell upon the celestial realms. This perfect nature that Adam possessed was also called the heavenly man. Hermes' teachings convey the idea that a celestial counterpart remained in heaven after the souls of mankind incarnated into the human body. A separation occurred. The higher mind and heavenly man are the same, and in Tibetan Buddhism this higher mind is called the diamond body. In Hinduism, to realize the Atman is to transcend the human by integrating higher consciousness. It is a divine presence that can empower human consciousness. In Corpus Hermeticum 1-1-18 7 Uziarchs are identified from Seth to Noah. The Creator is called the Unbegotten, Adam the Self-begotten, and Seth the Begotten. The concept of being self-begotten or self-born is to do with ancient initiators who had a divine and angelic nature, so they were called angelic. It's in that sense that the sons of God are referred to as angels in the Septuagint. Manetho's history of Egypt is lost, but according to some of his commentators, he wrote 3 volumes on the divine kingship that ruled for 13,900 years, and on the semi-divine one that ruled for 11,025 years before the mortal pharaohs. Like Hermes, Herodotus, Diodorus, Erastusthenes, and the Egyptian high priest Manetho, Plato affirmed that the mortal Egyptian dynasties were preceded by divine ones, and semi-divine ones in the time of the followers of Horus. Unfortunately, the Egyptologists have relegated these testimonies to the mythological realm. The inscriptions that covered the walls of the Egyptian temples were studied before Christ in order to learn the oral and written philosophy of Moses, in addition to an ancient Egyptian wisdom of divine origin. In Heliopolis there existed a legacy noted by Herodotus, Solon, and Pythagoras, according to which the priests of Egypt kept effigies of their human kings, as well as those of preceding divine rulers who had been born in a way that was called being self-born. Hermes' teachings also allude to beings who had the ability to create bodies of their own will. It seems that the initiators could create a body by opposition to being incarnated and born of woman. Researchers seek answers in extraterrestrial origins, but the ancient initiators descended upon Earth, not by flying saucers or spaceships, even if the Egyptians of the Atlantean era possessed this technology. They lowered themselves down from the kingdom of the soul, a higher dimension, by being self-born. According to Ewarrenan, the creator of the lost history of the earth. The reason that the god Hermes was represented with wings is that they were a symbol of connection with higher forces, or the ether. I would say the etheric realm as well. I can add that the use of symbols in this way is a writing system that is called pictographic. Wings also indicate that these beings were the initiators who lowered themselves down from the celestial realms. The depictions of human figures, with animal or bird heads, also were pictographic to convey some information. In the Hermetic tradition, Adam is viewed as divine, and 7 Uziarchs, spelled Ousiarchs, are revealed as being 7 generations from Seth to Noah. Seth follows immediately after Adam, and Noah is the 8th from Adam in this genealogy, but it does not correspond to Genesis 5, in which Enoch is the 7th from Adam, and Noah is the 10th. Biblical scholars say that the chronology of Genesis 5 and 11 in the Masoretic text does not match the original text of the Septuagint, either, and is the result of a deliberate and systematic corruption. Having compared the genealogies for the lines of Seth and Cain, down to Noah, because Cain's is supposed to end with the flood, I suspect that the genealogy of Genesis 5 was fabricated. The names are the same in both genealogies, but spelled differently, and almost in the same position of succession, except for Mahujael, son of Irad in Cain's line, who becomes Mahalalel, and father of Jared in Seth's line. Jared and Irad are the same but spelled differently. The Hebrew alphabet has no vowel letters. The letters only mark consonants, which means that when you look at a word you would have no idea how it is pronounced. This means that Jared could be read as Jirad, and Irad could be read as Arad. It seems that Mahujael, the 5th from Adam in Cain's line, son of Irad, was switched to a different position in Seth's line, just after Canaan. The Enos, son of Seth, can be written as Enoch or Enoch, so both Seth and Cain would have called their firstborn Enoch. Was it because they lacked imagination? Cain's son, Enoch, became the 7th from Adam in the line of Seth. In Seth's line, under Jared, you see Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. In Cain's line, Irad becomes Jared in Seth's line, and Mahujael, the son of Irad, becomes the father of Jared in Seth's line. Methuselah, Lamech and Noah in Cain's line become Methuselah, Lamech and Noah in Seth's line. I consider it possible that a false genealogy was created because Enoch was Cain's son. I am not saying that Adam did not have a son called Seth, nor that Seth's line did not exist. Also, without Seth's line the sons of God cannot be explained as the sons of Seth marrying the daughters of Cain. Strangely enough, Canaan, which is where Cain builds a city after having been exiled, is the destination for the Israelites who come out of Egypt with Moses, and it also is where they encounter giants that did not perish in the flood. So, could Seth's genealogy have been fabricated because of the belief that righteousness is dependent upon genetics and one's ancestry? In my opinion, human beings are good or evil according to the choices they make, as well as the nature of the soul and incarnation. It is because the world fails to consider the life stream that is incarnated in any particular person, that a damning accusation in the 4th Gospel has permitted the Nazis to demonize Jews. Christ apparently stated to some Jews that their father the devil was a murderer from the beginning and had no truth in him. This is in John 8:39-59, and there are similar statements in other Gospels. This was interpreted as applying to race instead of an incarnation at a particular time. So the Jews were identified as children of Satan. But the Jews also descended from Noah, therefore the Nazi idea that Semitic people are different from the Aryans also is erroneous. The term Satan, by the way, seems to derive from the Egyptian Seth, the god of chaos and mythical brother and murderer of the initiator of serious origin called Osiris, a similar scenario to that of Cain killing his brother Abel. The Old Testament was also called the Law of Moses. Its authorship is ascribed to Moses, who was brought up in Egypt, and also communicated directly with God in the traditional manner described in the Hermetic teachings. Enoch has visions and is taken to various heavenly realms called heavens, perhaps by astral projection, or by a location, not by any transport of his body. These supernatural experiences correspond to the mention of initiatory journeys to celestial realms in Hermetic teachings. The Slavonic 2 Enoch casts him as if he was predestined to regain the perfect nature that Adam possessed and that was lost by humanity because of the fall from the symbolic Garden of Eden. The Book of Enoch operates with a different mythology of evil from the Adamic tradition, in which Satan is the adversary. It is on the basis that fallen angels corrupted human beings by disclosing celestial secrets. Enoch blames the Watchers that he also calls sons of heaven for having disclosed some secrets to the women they cohabited with. He ascribes the corruption of the world to revelations which were regarded by the Egyptians and Greeks as a philosophy and the teachings of scientific knowledge that kick-started civilization. There hardly is any distinction in 1 Enoch between the beings who created a corruption in the old world and their fathers, the initiators. There only is one sentence stating that some Watchers corrupted the earth, whereas some others were corrupted. Those guilty for the corruption are the Nephilim, and those who are viewed as corrupted, did nothing more than reveal some teachings of knowledge called celestial secrets to the daughters they married. That is presented as the cause for the corruption of the world. The authorship of the Book of Enoch is generic, so could the reason for this view have been that one of the authors objected to the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus? In theosophy, there is a concept of 7 root races that are manifested in the process of completing an evolutionary cycle, except for the fact that some souls ascend back to the higher realms and are therefore freed from the wheel of life before other souls. And now we will explore who the sons of God, these ancient initiators like Adam, were in the context of this system. I started studying theosophy 60 years ago, so you are in good hands.
The root races of mankind. The mystery of our human civilization goes back much farther than we can imagine. There are 7 root races, or evolutionary cycles, through which humanity evolves. Each root race is divided into 7 minor cycles, called sub-races, which are again subdivided into 7 branch or family races. These subdivisions are related to the modern concept of races and ethnicities. It must be stressed that the sub-races refer to cultural qualities and not to the level of evolution of the soul. They are different evolutionary stages that humanity as a whole goes through successively. The same individuals that compose the current humanity have been reborn in all the previous root races. The root races are stages in human evolution in the esoteric cosmology of theosophist Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, as described in her book, The Secret Doctrine, in the year 1888. These races existed mainly on now-lost continents. According to Blavatsky's writings, there will be 7 root races assembled on Earth. Each root race is divided into 7 sub-races. Only 5 root races have appeared so far. The 6th root race is expected to emerge in the 28th century. We are presently at the 5th stage, referred to as the Aryans. The word Aryans means noble in Sanskrit. It is unfortunate that the term Aryan was adopted and perverted by Hitler and his intellectual predecessors, fantasies of an Aryan Superman, and is still used today by right-wing, white power extremists. Hitler and his inner circle also perverted some genuine ancient symbols, like the swastika, an ancient Sanskrit symbol. There have been many Earth civilizations, of which we know nothing. These races evolved from ethereality to materiality.
The earlier root races existed on now lost continents. The imperishable Sacred Island was the first cradle of mankind, Hyperborea II, Lemuria III and Atlantis IV. The sons of God can be identified as the third root race initiators who assumed bodies and created the fifth root race by intermarriages with the daughters of the Atlantean fourth root race. The progenitors of the fifth root race were beings who had evolved in the Lemurian third root race, called sons of will and yoga. These superior beings were entrusted with the task of initiating the Atlanteans after they had reached a high level of evolution. Adam is an exemplification of those initiators of the third root race. It was the fallen progeny of the intermarriages that created the empire of Atlantis. In Vedic teachings, Noah's counterpart also survives the flood and is called Vaivasvata Manu, and Manu means man. His ark descended on the top of the Himalayas, and his progeny, 7 rishis, or sages, were called the Aryas, and the Aryans were the fifth root race. These 7 sages, or rishis, were ascetic, practiced yoga, and battled against evil. The Vedas are the teachings they preserved. In the Genesis Apocryphon in Aramaic, found at Qumran in Cave 1, the description of Noah's skin as white as snow, and of his hair as white and like wool, is in similar terms to what is stated for the Ancient of Days in the prophet Daniel's vision. The explanation for this mystery is that Noah was of the fifth root race and may have had some recessive genes that made him look like the beings of the third root race. Lord Sanat Kumara corresponds to the Ancient of Days in the Bible and is also known in Buddhism as Brahma Sanam Kumara. In the spiritual tradition, he is the head of the spiritual hierarchy of Earth, whose headquarters are in Shambhala, although it is Lord Gautama Buddha who now holds that position of Lord of the world. As the Ancient of Days, the Lord of the Flame, Sanat Kumara, recreated this world, from its former self as Tiamat, when it was due to be destroyed because of its evil. Sanat Kumara had arrived approximately 18 million years ago. Some of the demonic spirits of Tiamat were allowed to incarnate in the fifth root race later. Those demonic spirits of Tiamat are who the Nephilim were. The era of Lemuria, which began in the Jurassic period about 34 million years ago, belongs to the old world of Tiamat. These Lemurians coexisted with the dinosaurs, or reptilians, that were gradually wiped out in the recreation of the world. At the end of the Lemurian period, the beings who became initiators, the sons of God, had achieved their ascension. Another name for Sanat Kumara is the Silent Watcher. The Watchers can be associated with the Lemurians and their third eye vision. Again, I think the depiction of an extra eye in the middle of the Cyclops' forehead has a pictographic origin. It represents the etheric third eye chakra and pineal gland that give us God vision, discernment and psychic powers. These beings had but 2 eyes as we do. The image illustrates John of Patmos' vision in the book of Revelation. This woman clothed with the sun symbolizes the souls of mankind, not Mary the mother of Jesus, who is ascended and doesn't need protection. The symbolism of being clothed with the sun relates to the weaving of a solar body for spiritual ascension, and the red dragon represents the satanic Nephilim ready to sabotage mankind's spiritual evolution. In Revelation 12, Archangel Michael binds the devil in a bottomless pit after the latter attempts to sweep the woman away with a flood. This reference to a flood has not been recognized as the flood of Genesis because of the interpretation that these events are prophecies. Archangel Michael defends the woman clothed with the sun against the red dragon as it is ready to devour the progeny, which is symbolic for giving birth to higher consciousness. The woman is able to elude the dragon during 1,203 score days. The score days is a translation of Hebrew time measurement amounting to 3 units of 20 days or 60 of our days. or approximately 2 months. The 1,200 are not days but Hebrew week years, since 60 days is already 2 months. Those years are ancient Hebrew week years because of the use of the term score. The total of 1,200 amounts to 8,400 of our years, because a Hebrew week year is a period of time condensing 7 of our year time measurement. In other words, we need to multiply this period of time by 7 to obtain the equivalent of our own years. This is a period of time during which mankind is not being tyrannized, controlled or deceived, because the forces of darkness are bound in chains and unable to incarnate. We can calculate the time of the reappearance of these fallen ones from the date given by Plato as 9564 BC for the Atlantean cataclysm, i.e. 1164 BC. This is when the period of rest may have ended. The Dead Sea Scrolls refer to the reincarnation of the Nephilim as the man from the pit and sons of darkness. This concept also exists in the Book of Enoch, with the flood being the first phase of a judgment in which the spirits of the Nephilim are bound in chains in bottomless pits for a certain period of time, and with their release in a second phase for the consummation of this judgment, before their final judgment takes place. In the final judgment, the spirits of the fallen ones are to be consumed in a lake of fire. This means that they will cease to exist, and the effects of the final judgment are eternal. There is no judgment for mankind. It is only for those Nephilim, or forces of darkness. Revelation 20 also describes how an archangel binds the dragon. This archangel can be no other than Archangel Michael. He holds the key to the bottomless pits and a great chain in his hand. He seizes the dragon and binds him for 1,000 years. It is the same event as in Revelation 12, but the 203 score days are missing. It states that the dragon should deceive the nations no more till the end of this 1,000 years, after which he must be loosed a little season. Revelation 20 is the basis for the concept of millennialism. It is the view that Satan will be bound in a pit during a period of 1,000 years during which Christ will reign. But millennialists have not connected the time when Satan is loosed with that of the Nephilim and when they are allowed to reincarnate. It also is a misinterpretation because the period of rest, or reign of Christ, is not going to happen in the future. It is that period of 8,400 years during which the Nephilim were unable to incarnate and deceive mankind upon the physical plane. The common view in Christianity is that Jesus returns as a warrior, or as the Word of God, and that an Armageddon is followed by a millennial rule of righteousness during which time the souls of the martyrs are resurrected. This resurrection is on the basis of a sentence stating the dead lived not again, and it is a misinterpretation because the term dead does not refer to martyrs, or saints, but to the dead in spirit, those Nephilim that were to return in incarnation for their judgment. In the Christian view, the resurrection of the saints is followed by Satan being released again, and then destroyed forever before a second resurrection when humanity is judged. It's complicated because of the misinterpretations. The fathers of the Roman Catholic Church expected a future materialistic rule of the saints for a literal 1,000 years, not knowing that it had already taken place. What is wrong with this belief is that the length of Christ's reign should not be limited to 1,000 years. It should be forever. There will be a time when mankind will be able to receive the fruit of the tree of life again. It means knowledge will be revealed, but this time it will not be misused as it was during the Antediluvian era due to the deception of the forces of darkness. The spirits of the Nephilim have been among us for a long time, even since before Christ, and what is wrong in the world indeed is due to their work. This is the mystery of the sons of God elucidated as having possessed an angelic nature and as comparable to Adam. They have further been identified as the forgotten initiators of the third root race who guided the Atlanteans into civilization, and who were gradually erased from mankind's memory with the passing of time, and principally because of the loss of that hub of knowledge that the Library of Alexandria represented. It is complete.